So I wanted to give some of my thoughts on aging and just recent events that are happening in the world and how they kind of correlate. Because what's interesting with me is I and many other people, we entered into our 30s around, a few years ago, around the same time the big event happened. The event that YouTube censors people a lot for talking about. So I'm not going to refer to the big event by name, but you all know what I'm talking about. The big event that happened 3 years ago, 2020, the big event. Yeah, me and a lot of other people entered into our 30s around the same time the big event happened. And I think there's something important about that, because if you look at it, as I've said many times, my specific sub-generation, like people born in the year I was and in the years immediately next to that year, we're kind of like the largest number of the millennials. Like there was a lot of millennials born. Specifically, I think it's like roughly 1987 to 1992. There was just a huge baby bump in the Western world. Well, I don't know if it's the whole Western world or just like Canada and the US, but there was a huge baby bump around that time. And not only that, but the millennials as a whole are kind of like, we're called the echo boom. Like we're the echo of the baby boomers. We're the kids that they had. But there was specifically a boom within a boom in those specific years, like 1987 to 1992. And I was born in that period of time, as was my buddy Argent, as were many other millennials. Like it's a very large number of people were born in those specific years. And I think there's something to that in terms of what's been happening in world events lately, because as I said, people born in that specific era entered their 30s around the same time the big event happened. And the thing is, it's a question that I keep having to ask myself in so many circumstances, and I think other people around me are asking the same question. Are things changing because of the big event and all the other events that it created, or because we're getting older? It's a very difficult question to ask. Like, for instance, why is it that random people don't talk to me as much anymore, just in public? People just don't seem as friendly anymore. And specifically, attractive women don't seem to like flirt with me or smile at me or things like that as often these days compared to before. Is it because of the big event and the way it changed people, like made people more antisocial, more socially distanced in more ways than one? Or is it because I'm just getting older, and frankly, like most of the women my age are mostly already married or in long-term relationships, and the younger women just see me as too old for them. And that's another thing that's changing lately, is like there's less social acceptance of age gaps in relationships, even if both people are legal adults. So I think that's another thing that's happening. The third factor thrown into the woodwork here is the Me Too movement and its consequences. But yet again, it raises the question, though, is it like, did the big event exacerbate the effects of Me Too? Or is it simply just I'm getting older and a lot of women just see me as some like aging guy in his 30s? But those aren't the only things that are changing lately, because I've noticed some other things. Like, for instance, I've hardly been to any parties since the big event happened. And again, is that because of the big event or because I'm getting older? I don't know. Similarly, like a lot of people around me, like when I look at my Facebook, my normie Facebook feed, and even my edgy Facebook feed, like both my accounts, I've noticed a lot fewer people are traveling these days. And it's like, again, is that because they're getting older or because of the big event? Like, one statistic that I saw, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to find this article because I looked at it a while ago, but I can confirm this is a legitimate statistic from a legitimate article. It wasn't just some like fake ass conspiracy site or whatever. It said that the number one group that has been traveling less since the big event happened is millennials. The pre-big event rates of travel from older people like Gen X and boomers have actually bounced back. And same with the pre-big event travel rates of younger people like Gen Z. But it's millennials who are not traveling anymore, who are not traveling anywhere near as much as they used to. And I'm seeing that among my friends. I'm definitely seeing that. I'm actually bucking the trend by traveling a lot in the last few years, which makes me, bizarrely, I'm almost seen as like weird for doing it. It's like, I'm seen as like living in the past, I guess, for still traveling. Well, I mean, I kind of am living in the past because I'm looking at historic architecture from centuries ago. But regardless, I mean, I think that's interesting. Like, oh, and I'm looking at natural scenery from literally millennia ago. Maybe millions of years ago. Who knows? But yeah, my point still stands on that. Like millennials just aren't traveling anymore. They used to be seen as the generation that was like really into travel, but not just into travel. Like they're into like living in neighborhoods that are the kind of places people would travel to, like historic neighborhoods with old architecture. That's kind of what a lot of hipsters were seeking out, especially in the 2000s and the 2010s, which leads me to my next point. Millennials have kind of abandoned the millennial dream. Like, it seemed like the millennial dream was, we're going to rebel against the boomers and the Gen Xers by rejecting the suburban American dream and forging our own dream, which involves, you know, going into the cities, into historic neighborhoods. Like, in a way, hipsters are kind of the last stand of implicit traditionalist identity. Ironically enough, it is kind of true. And there's this whole thing, people are mocking the alt-right, calling them Nazi hipsters. Like, I actually saw a sticker in Europe once that said, like, punch the Nazi hipster. It said this, like, in German or Dutch or something. But there's actually some truth to that. Like, there was a lot of coalescing between the alt-right and hipsterdom. And I do think that hipsterdom actually was, in some ways, like the last movement that actually tried to reclaim a sense of authenticity, a sense of traditionalism. For all its faults, hipsterdom actually valued authenticity. It valued local restaurants. It valued local bars, neighborhoods with historic architecture. It valued things like that and not mass commodified chain restaurants, chain bars, chain stores, mass commodified suburbia. So for all its faults, like, yes, hipsters can be pretentious, they can be douchebags, and yes, like, hipsters generally, for the most part, tended to be liberal, although there was that kind of, like, alt-right hipster thing. But for what it's worth, the hipsterdom, it was kind of the last attempt, and it was an attempt by my generation to reclaim some vestige of traditional identity. And props to it for that. And I think, honestly, the big event is kind of what killed hipsterdom. It definitely killed hipsterdom from my generation, and I'm not sure if Gen Z is trying to revive it at all. I have no idea what the fuck Gen Z is doing other than getting those hideous broccoli haircuts and doing increasingly ridiculous TikTok challenges. But, I mean, honestly, I do kind of lament the death of hipsterdom, if it indeed has died. Well, it definitely has died among my generation, that's for sure. Because my generation, in the last few years since the big event, they seem to have made it their mission to out-boomer the boomers. Like, no, actually, we're not going to raise families in traditional neighborhoods. We're going to go into the most aggressively suburban places, not just suburbs, but exurbs, suburbs of suburbs, and we're going to raise our kids there. Or, what many millennials are doing now, they're buying homes in these exurbs of exurbs and raising pets there and pretending like their pets are their kids. I'm seeing a lot of people doing that, like LARPing as parents with pets in the exurbs or suburbs, or probably like exurbs of suburbs. And you know, it's kind of like the wave speech from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, you know, seeing the high watermark of hipsterdom, of that attempt of millennials to reclaim authenticity as a value and hipsterism just becoming completely subsumed by bugmanism, which is now really what millennials have embraced. Like, the difference between hipsterism and bugmanism is that hipsterism, for all its flaws, it values the authentic, whereas bugmanism, it values the fake. It values the mass-produced, the globalized, it values the mass-marketed chain stores, suburban sprawl, or just like cut and paste glass condo buildings. And I feel like millennials are going that way. What they're becoming is a mix of like bugmen and truly embracing the echo boomer identity. Like, they are now echoes of their parents, but in some ways without some of the redeeming qualities of their parents, because at least boomers, for all their flaws, had some like traditional conservative values when it came to like family, even on an implicit level, race to some extent. Like, they were more conservative than us in many ways. But now what you have with millennials is they're essentially becoming liberal suburbanites or exurbanites. And they're often some of them are having kids, but often they're not having kids. They're often having just pets and pretending they're kids. And when they do have kids, like, I mean, let's just say, I'm trying to be delicate with my phrasing here because I don't want my videos to keep getting flagged. Let's just say they're having kids that don't entirely look like both parents. You get what I mean. Kids in relationships where each parent looks very dissimilar and where the kid typically looks more like one of the parents than the other. Or sometimes somewhere in between. You get what I mean. Yeah, but my point is, okay, like, that's what millennials are doing these days. I'm really sad because honestly, I had this vision of millennials just like reclaiming these cities, and raising families there, reclaiming the cities from like the ghetto elements and raising families. And yes, these people would initially be liberals. The initial wave of them would be liberals, but eventually the conservatives would follow. And you'd then have conservatives raising families in like traditional historic neighborhoods. And that it would be like some attempt at like reclaiming what we had before World War II ruined everything. Before World War II and all the shit associated with it, like the 1950s, suburbanization, modern architecture, all this crap. Like, I really thought there was a chance. And in the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, it seemed to be going in that direction. Like, if you looked at demographic statistics, the cities are actually becoming whiter and the suburbs are becoming less white. And I was thinking maybe we have a chance of like reclaiming these historic cities. But now I'm not so sure. Like, I don't know what the statistics have been demographically for the last few years. But I don't know. Are they reversing themselves? Is it going back to like the 1950s and 60s trends of like, you know, whites all moving to the suburbs or even beyond the suburbs, like to the exurbs? And in some ways, these exurbs, like, oh my gosh, it's like they're LARPing as like ruralites or small town people, but they're actually commuting to the city from like 2-3 hours away in each direction. So it's like, I mean, it's like how to maximize your carbon emissions. Well, I mean, I guess if they're actually commuting to work every day, because some of these people, I guess, are working from home or working in a hybrid kind of model. But regardless, it's like, I don't know. It's like they're not really that's another thing, frankly. Like, a lot of these people, they're going to these small towns, and you know, I'm not a huge fan of every aspect of small town culture, but the fact is these people are going to small towns and they are spreading liberal values. And a lot of the people from these towns are complaining about that, and justifiably so. I mean, because like, I'm not a huge fan of like the insularity of small town culture. Like, I think a lot of these people, you know, they don't know that much about the outside world, and it is kind of a problem, like this like unironic ignorance. But nonetheless, I think they do have a point in saying, like, yeah, these people are coming here from the larger metropolitan areas and they're bringing their values with them. And a lot of these values are like really hardcore liberal values, like, you know, your typical gamut of the rainbow flag values and everything associated with that. And yeah, it is largely millennials who are driving this trend. Like right now, at this point in history, millennials are the main generation that is having children. They're the main generation that is starting families. And a lot of them are raising these children with liberal values. Like that's kind of just the reality of it. Like people said like there's this age-old idea like people become more conservative as they age, and with millennials what we're seeing is like this unholy amalgamation of like the worst aspects of liberalism and the worst aspects of conservatism. Like millennials are becoming more conservative, quote unquote conservative, specifically on the issues of like suburbia and car culture. Like they're embracing boomerism full on in that regard. But they're no more conservative than before. If anything, they're still continuing to become more liberal on social issues like anything to do with race, immigration, gender, sexuality, etc. So you have this like unholy amalgamation of the worst aspects of liberalism and conservatism where millennials are essentially becoming liberal suburbanites or exurbanites. They're becoming boomers in terms of their lifestyles, but extreme liberals in terms of their values. They're basically what they are is Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru with butt plugs. That's what they are. They are that grumpy hobbit from Lord of the Rings, but if he had the trans gay pride flag on the front of his hobbit hole, and they saw that flag whenever they walked by his hobbit hole and he's scowling at the youngsters. That's basically what millennials are becoming. And I guess what I'm becoming and why I feel increasingly out of touch with my generation, I'm kind of becoming the opposite, you know? I'm becoming this, like, guy with very far-right views on many social issues, but who doesn't embrace the boomerist lifestyle. So, I don't know. Like, in conclusion, fuck my generation. Fuck in particular what it's becoming in the last few years. I don't know, maybe Gen Z can save us. Maybe they will be the ones to see the light. Because you know what? It won't be millennials. We're the most worthless generation in all of fucking history. And I am ashamed to be a part of it. And the saddest thing of all is, millennials, they always swore we would never become like our parents. And lo and behold, they're becoming exactly like their parents in all the worst ways, but not in the better ways. So, hats off to them for that. And one other thing I might add, millennials are the single most obsessed with nostalgia of any generation ever. And it's really quite ridiculous how, like, for instance, the new Super Mario Brothers movie is making $1 billion because of nostalgic aging millennials. It's not kids who are seeing this movie. It's fucking millennials in their 30s and 40s. So, I mean, I find that really funny how, like, for all their claims of being like this like bold, innovative, forward-thinking generation, they're actually like really, really, really fucking obsessed with childhood nostalgia to the point of it being pathetic. Like, I mean, honestly, not everything from the 80s and 90s was good, or the 2000s for that matter, okay? Like, I mean, I kind of did a whole other video on that, but yeah, that's another thing.